Welcoming back Ina Fried.
Are the shoulder pads supposed to go under the chest? You may have noticed I added an accessory. It's not a fashion statement. Well, it's not just a fashion statement. It's actually part of an AI project between AWS, Amazon Web Services, and the NFL. It's part of a broader campaign they've dubbed the Digital Athlete, and it's part of an attempt to mitigate against injuries and more. Here's a quick video to explain more, and I will be back in just a second.
In the NFL, the game is constantly evolving, and so are ways to better protect players. Powered by AWS, the NFL created the Digital Athlete, an injury prediction tool. By analyzing millions of data points generated by a player's every move, AWS AI and machine learning are helping to identify when players may be at an increased risk of injury, enabling teams to develop individualized training and recovery regimens. The NFL is focused on the health and safety of every player. It's a key to building a better game.
Okay, so that's a little bit of glimpse of what the NFL is working on. Here to chat with me more about how this works is Jeff Miller, an executive VP for player safety, comms, and public affairs at the NFL, and Julie Souza, the global head of sport at AWS. Jeff and Julie. So we all saw the pads, and that's great. That's one place that the NFL is collecting data, but that's only a small part of it. Where all are you collecting data, and what are you using it for?
So much data. In addition to the pads, every player, so 2,000 players a week, wearing GPS locators. You see it when you watch the games. You see how fast players are running, or the routes that they're running, and when they're open or not, or what the quarterback sees. That comes from that. But in addition, every piece of equipment they wear, specifically helmets, but cleats and shoulder pads too, as well as, really importantly, the vast majority of cameras that you see angles from, we're getting data from, including even last year when you saw cameras in the pylons at the goal line. All of this is contributing to the work that we're doing in collecting and aggregating all of this information to help us make the game better.
We're going to talk about what you do with that, but before you can do anything with it, that's just a ton of raw data. And before you can use that much data, you have to make something out of it. And I assume that's where you and the AWS team come in, Julie?
Yeah. I mean, and just to underscore the point about how much data, and Jeff alluded to all the different sources of it, but from the optical tracking, 38 cameras in the venue, that's 6.8 million frames of data per week that we're getting.
And I think we have a video that shows kind of what's coming in and how you make it. But when it comes to that much data, like, how do you even know what to look for? How do you assess the patterns? What do you do with that? And Amazon, just so you know, AWS, I mean, this is your job as head of sport. You're doing this for a bunch of different sports, and obviously each sport has different needs. With the NFL, there's a lot of safety issues. But how do you start to make sense of that much data and make use of it?
I mean, it's always working backwards from the questions we're trying to solve, right? So, and Jeff, we can talk about this a little bit later too. I mean, concussions are a real concern in the NFL. So how do we first detect them, right? And so that's where a lot of these different tracking sources come into play. And then how do we deploy technology like computer vision and AI and ML to help look for those patterns in the data, to help us isolate and then create models to predict and protect, right? So risk mitigation modeling is a big part of the work we're doing for Digital Athlete with the NFL.
And I think we have a video, if we can play that. This shows some of that data coming in. So you're measuring stuff that's useful for safety. You're measuring stuff also, I think, that's useful for fans, that's useful for, you know, gambling and betting is an increasing revenue source for all the sports leagues. A lot of this data serves multiple purposes, right?
Yeah, I mean, that's what's exciting about it. It sort of started, and one of the inputs is the next-gen stats data that helps feed sort of on, if you're watching it on Thursday Night Football on Prime Video, the Prime Vision cast, right? All of those analytics and defensive alerts and things like that. So there's absolutely broad application, player health and safety, rule development, rule changes. I mean, you can talk about this stuff, right?
Yeah, because one of the things that's critical is not just knowing there's a lot of head contact and concussions, but what do you do about it? And so talk some of the ways that you're taking action.
First, excellent job on cross-promotion for Thursday Night Football, so that's appreciated always. But also what you saw there for a second is exactly what our clubs take a look at, what our trainers look at, our doctors look at, literally on a daily basis. They have an interface looking at every player, all their loads, what they've done in practices, what they've done in games, what is their injury history, what equipment are they wearing. And from that, with AWS's help, we can predict their risk profiles. At what point is somebody running hot? Which receiver do you need to pull back on that week? Who's been exposed to more than they should? And we can start to govern how we manage them. Now, in addition to that,
I think we have another video. Let's take a quick look at that because it shows what you're talking about, I think. So this is a video from a game. And what you're seeing in the red, if I'm not mistaken, is head-to-head contact.
That's our head detection system. So we used to literally go through manually, not me, but somebody, would go through and count every head contact as we were looking at ways to better understand the magnitude of head contact and the likelihood of injury, specifically concussions, share that information with helmet manufacturers so they could design better helmets against it. Instead, we taught the computers to do it. So literally every time somebody hits their head in an NFL game, we know, we share that back with the clubs, with the coaches, we share it with the equipment managers, we share it with the equipment manufacturers to say, build us something better than what we've had before, given the fact that different players experience the game differently, suffer injuries at different rates and in different ways.
And it wasn't that long ago that everyone wore a similar helmet. Then they have position-based helmets. Now they have them tailored to each individual. Then, as you talked about, another level that it's being used is so that teams know at the individual level how each of their players is kind of how much
what their exposures are and what the risk is of them suffering an injury. And now, it's not a clinical tool, it's not a diagnostic, maybe someday, maybe. But we know the velocity of those impacts, the magnitudes, the closing speeds, we know the direction, the impact, how frequent, all of the things you might imagine, and to learn that a quarterback suffers a concussion very differently from an offensive lineman, but until this past year, they wore the same equipment, made no sense. So now we have 8 new position-specific helmets for the linemen, for the quarterbacks, next year for, hopefully, folks in the secondary because they experience things differently. But not only that, getting back to the rules part, Julie mentioned, that same platform that you saw, it was the foundation for what will be the biggest change in the NFL in many years, which is the change to the kickoff. We were able to identify the kickoff as the highest rate of injury and the highest concussion rate of any play. Not the highest number, but the highest rate. And so when you took a look at that and then tried to design a play where you would minimize those areas where there's the highest risk exposure, led to the pretty different changes you're going to see in a couple months.
So when kickoff happens in September, kickoffs won't look quite the same. And part of the reason is what you were able to get from the data.
We saw where the biggest risks are to the most players in terms of injuries, specifically concussions. The spaces and the speeds and the areas on the field where they hit one another, specifically the closing velocities. How do you extract those risk areas and yet have a play that is still relevant and maybe even exciting? So with all that extracted, we knew what the issue areas were and could start to address those and figure it out. The fans are going to see it in August and September. I am sure that they're going to react, hopefully well. I think it's going to be really exciting, but it was all driven by some of the data that we're helping, that AWS is helping us collect and work with.
Most of what we've seen are different ways, both at the rules level, team level, individual level, to make the game safer. I'm curious, do you think this gets us as far as we need? I love football, I love watching football, and it's concerning to me that it seems to have long-term risks for all the players that are involved. Do you think technology will get us to a point where we can say football is safe for our sons and daughters to play?
Well, it's what you do with the technology that gets you there. I mean, as I stand here today, compared to 3 years ago, concussions are down 25% across the NFL. That's great. Hamstring strains are down 40% across the NFL because we redesigned the beginning of training camp as a result of the data that we were collecting because of the sensors on all of the players. So can you get to the fact never going to be any injuries? Of course not. There's no finish line here. But the equipment will improve, the training will improve, the gameplay will improve, witness the rules, and we're going to end up with a better and safer game for the players.
One last thing I'll say on to that is that it's not limited to the NFL. I think this has broad application not only to other sports but other industries like military and training and things like that. So I think a lot of the forward work that the NFL is doing will have broad application beyond just the game of football.
All right, so you heard it here first. Be sure to change your fantasy team accordingly. Thank you so much, to Jeff and Julie. And I did want to just put one more reminder. If you did want to take part in the AI photo contest to win the Meta Smart Glasses, you do have to not only create the image, but email it to us. If you're having any trouble, come to the registration desk. Someone from Axios will help you do it. We've gotten a bunch of really cool entries, but we'd love to see more. So again, you just use the QR code on the back of your badge. And I will be back in a minute with our last couple of interviews. And we've got a little bit more for you. So thank you.